So thank you, Cam, Robert, and Mike for taking this time. We've already been learning quite a bit. We had Bruce Underwood earlier, Indigenous client working with Christy Coltman and just explaining his background and the work he's done and what we could be doing to connect. And now we just heard from Wesley Scott working with IRSSS, Indian Residential School Survivors Society, the impact that they're making. So I'll put it over to you, Robert. Thank you for the incredible work you've been doing in the community, and you're in our backyard here in Victoria. And maybe give us a little bit of background on the work that you do, what has inspired you to work with Indigenous communities, and the list goes on of the fight that you're on through everything that you're doing. But I don't think I could do it justice if you can explain it probably best.
Well, I won't belabor too much. I mean, I'm a litigator, but as always with people who work in the Aboriginal law field, is you have to be pretty diverse in your type of work. You have to be able to advise clients at all kinds of hours. I work both with nations in the Aboriginal rights and title type litigation, but also in advising them on negotiations and business and stuff like that. But I also work a fair bit with Indigenous individuals, particularly people with status, who are looking at either cleaning up messes that have occurred because of lack of planning, or helping them plan around either the tax situation or some of the unique problems that are faced by First Nations individuals on reserve land. And I don't want to take up, I let everybody else get introduced first. I think we're all keen to get into the substance of this given the limited time we have.
100%, yes. I'll introduce Cam Sadhu here next through MNP. Cam is a CPA, and from some of our conversations, Cam, from traveling across Western Canada, one of the meetings you mentioned was jumping on a plane, showing up, and then the meeting was canceled. Nobody really knew, and that's what you roll with. The care that you take, the work that you're doing is incredible. You are the Indigenous representative and work directly with Indigenous communities through MNP. So maybe give us a little bit of an introduction and background there, Cam.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Phil. My name's Cam Sandhu. I'm a partner here with MNP. I'm based out of our Nanaimo location. But as Phil mentioned, one of my passions is traveling to remote communities throughout BC, throughout Western Canada, and learning about the people of that certain community as well. I am an accountant by trade. I am a chartered professional accountant, but only a small part of what I do is that, where I add tremendous value to Indigenous communities and organizations is through the capacity building. If that's sitting at the table with the chief and councils and working on a business plan and reviewing financial information for a business they might want to purchase, or if it's assisting the finance department to build their capacity to be able to run their own finances from that aspect as well. So again, I won't take up too much time with the intro there, but again, thank you very much, and happy to be here and talk about my individual experiences with everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cam. Really appreciate it. Over to you, Mike. Thanks for jumping on here. I think I've got you unmuted. So Mike Carlson actually is an Advocates member, which is terrific. He's also written an inspiring article, which really gets to the point of things, which we'll present a little bit after this. But that actually inspired a lot of today. And so Mike, thanks for putting that together, really talking about this and starting this conversation, which now has trickled down to hopefully greater and greater things. So Mike, I'll pass it over to you.
For sure. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'll maybe tell you a little bit about myself, but also, just want to acknowledge folks coming here on what seems to be a beautiful day in the backgrounds of everybody's pictures, and spending time to talk about something that is certainly really meaningful to me, and it means a lot. Also want to acknowledge Bruce, Bruce, thanks so much for your words. I missed the first part of that, but really appreciate it. I identify as mixed Indigenous, so I'm mixed on my dad's side. My great-grandmother was a band member in the South Okanagan, in Osuyas. And so Interior Salish and Nez Perce are some of those teachings, but a lot of them have been lost. So Bruce, I really appreciated what you had to share. Folks, that's, I also know that a lot of folks here are from BC, and I always say that I live in Toronto now, but I left my heart in BC, because I spent a lot of time there, and I went to UBC in Vancouver, and then Toronto got its hooks in me, and I can't seem to leave. I like to say I am a generalist. I do a lot of things. I have my hands in a lot of different cookie jars, and one of them is certainly as a QAFP. I just wrote my CFP exams last year and passed, so I am on the path with the experience to becoming a full CFP, and I'm an Advocates member. I sort of fell into financial planning and the financial space from teaching math. And it was partially because a lot of the youth that I was working with and the older folks, I was teaching college courses to Indigenous social workers all across Ontario for a while. And I just saw how much was needed in terms of financial planning, in terms of the support, the basics. And so I always kind of shake my head and say, like, how did I get here to be speaking to you folks and in this kind of honorable position? And it's really just a sequence of saying yes to things and wanting to help. And now I have my own financial planning practice. And I'm also still involved with the education space and supply teach every once in a while and keep myself busy. But half of my clients are Indigenous in Toronto here, in urban Indigenous Toronto. Yeah, trying to find a business model that works, that's accessible to the community because there's such different needs. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm more than happy to share more later, but Phil, I'll pass it back to you.
Great. Well, thank you all, and the diverse backgrounds from different various experiences that you guys have. I do have a few questions that I want to pose out to the group. So we'll start maybe with you, Robert. And this will go to all three of you. So based on your experience working with Indigenous communities, how would you recommend a professional who has not worked with First Nations in the past start the process to reaching out and starting a conversation, perhaps with their local First Nations community members?
Well, that's a good question, and it's not exactly obvious how to start, how you necessarily reach out. In many cases, of course, it will be Indigenous people reaching out to you for help. And I think what you can do that will benefit you more than anything else is establish that you actually have the knowledge base and the interest and the care to actually be engaged with the issues. Because what I've observed over the years, and I think there's kind of three things that I would like to say that are challenging, is that often financial professionals, and that's the whole suite, lawyers, accountants, real estate advisors, sometimes don't recognize that there is significant wealth to be managed, that they make stereotypical assumptions about Indigenous people, about them not having wealth. And I don't know, I think you better get that picture off. It's not having wealth. The second thing is at a very basic level, and this is particularly something I see around wills and estates, is the failure to recognize that often special measures need to be taken to preserve wealth. And the third thing is, and this is really where there's an opportunity to grow your reputation in the community, because once you've helped someone achieve something, it's amazing how the word will spread, is recognizing that there are unique opportunities that are often not available to non-Indigenous people to grow wealth in a way that can be quite surprising, but it does require being creative, being aware, sometimes being a bit brave. And I will say, like I did one case for a business person one time, and I would say that I have had a good 20 or 30 other cases walk into the office just because of that one case and the word of mouth that comes with it.
Great. Over to you, Cam. what's been your experience on that, and then how would you recommend professionals moving forward?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that question, Phil. And I think before even reaching out to the community, I think the first question all the advisors and lawyers, financial advisors, or accountants should answer is why? Why do you think you want to work with Indigenous people? Why do you think these clients should be a part of your book and a part of your practice? I think if you're able to answer that question, then sort of the next approach would be to educate yourself on the specific First Nations that are in your particular area. I think that would be the next question there, and then reaching out to those individual nations themselves. So a lot of their information is posted online, reaching out to the specific administration offices, band offices, and just reaching out and seeing if there's someone you can connect with. There typically is someone within the organization that would be looking at, if it's member services, for example, that might be someone an advisor can connect with as well there. And then finally, I think it's just getting to know what sort of events are coming up in their particular area and just attending them from sort of getting more of an understanding of what is happening in their particular area as well. So that's sort of the approach that I had used with my particular sort of practice and where I am today in my career as well. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Cam. Perhaps on your side, Mike, how have you gotten involved? You said you're, such a large portion of your book of business is First Nations, Indigenous on your side, Mike. So yeah. How did you do that? Obviously, Toronto a little bit, different to BC, but not necessarily. But
yeah, and the urban centers, right? Like Vancouver and Toronto are I'm sure parallel markets with probably some different factors in there. So many things. I'll jump in with a few things. Robert, appreciate what you had to say there. I really agree that, so from an economic lens, and I know folks on this call are thinking from that side, there is a huge untapped market, unquestionably. There are stereotypes that Indigenous people are poor. That is changing. That has been true because of colonization and the removal of wealth and destruction of intellectual property and physical property. But there is a growing Indigenous middle class and a just starting Indigenous higher class, people with money who are looking for support. And so one of my, friends that works for a reserve always says, people think that reserves are these bottomless money pits that just have coffers of gold. But that Indigenous individuals are poor and no one gives a crap about them. And so a lot of consultants target First Nations, but ignore the actual people and the individual needs of the people. So I think, Phil, your question around how would you start working with them? Oh, this is so challenging. And there was a word that you used, and I just want to make mention of it. Use First Nations. Just to kind of just mention language here, Indigenous Please. Is kind of this larger umbrella, and it often includes FNMI, so First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. So I think it's always kind of best whenever anybody on the call is talking about Indigenous peoples to use the word Indigenous, unless you're chatting with someone like Bruce who might identify in a specific way, and then you can kind of reference them. For me, for example, I don't identify as First Nations because I'm non-status. I'm disconnected from my family's reserve from a long time ago. And so, but I would say I'm Indigenous. So
thank you. Yeah. Sorry for today. That's a great segue into, we're here listening, and I hope nothing puts anybody out or I hope today becomes first of many conversations that we're having. So, be as open, and you are, from your article, which we'll go into a little bit later today there, Mike. Thank you. So that it's very refreshing, and I'm not meaning to miss any language that should.
Philip, I'll say one more thing to that question, because I think it's an important one. I have a theory of change that is deeply grounded in relationship. Everyone here, I'm sure, gives financial advice to your family and friends. There's a reason for that. You have relationship. There's trust. You know who they are. You share culture. You go to the same places of worship or the same sports games, or your kids work in the same spaces and live and exist and play in the same kinds of spaces. That relationship is priceless. To go in cold without a relationship, you're not going to talk to anybody in sales who's going to say, hey, just cold call a bunch of people and just ask them what they need, right? You need to figure out and build that relationship and build that trust. And from an Indigenous worldview, and I'm very hesitant, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, to talk in like a pan-Indigenism, like a pan-Indigenous worldview. But generally, Indigenous worldviews would be long-term relationships, lifelong. I've been in Toronto for 10 years. I've been volunteering at community centers, working with youth. I now have youth that are in university or graduating that I know that are turning back to me to ask me for financial advice. I have community members who are referencing their elders or are receiving land settlement, land claim checks and asking me to help them work through those amounts of money because I'm someone who's trusted and has that relationship. Don't dive into the deep end if you don't know how to swim. Like, don't start looking for Indigenous clients just because you want to. It takes time and relationship is what I would say.
Thank you. And that's a perfect segue into, well, a couple of things there, what not to do. So maybe we'll start on your side here, Cam, from some of our conversations that we had. You did explain how long the process is and how much trust has to be built. So this is a question for everyone. What should we really be not doing? And you kind of hit it there too, Mike, on just be prepared for being involved for the long term, not a quick jumping on. So maybe if you want to roll with that, Cam.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Phil. I think one of the key items there is not to just generalize. So even within Indigenous people, Aboriginal people, Métis, Inuit, there's different cultures within that. Even on Vancouver Island, there's a multitude of different First Nations out here as well. So I think not just generalizing that in the sense of that, and as Mike mentioned, and as everyone on the call knows as well, relationship is always key. So really educating yourself on who's in your area, understanding the differences between them and even the nation down the road as well. I think that is very key. But I think the one takeaway would be just don't generalize and just assume something. If you don't know something, respectfully ask. That's all I'll say on that one there. Thanks, Phil.
On your side, Robert.
I would actually like to double down on that particular point and actually talk about it in a much more technical way, right? And there was a question in the chat about the issues around passing on estates, and like in many cases, and particularly in the interior of BC and Vancouver, at Squamish and Musqueam, over at Songhees, there are many nations where there are significant land holdings on reserve, where there are very large amounts of money tied up in families. Sorry for the noise in the background. But the reality is that the legal regime, like we're not just even talking about culture here, but the legal regime is different as you move from one reserve to another. So, the first mistake I've seen made, and which actually in many ways was my first introduction to the field, is lawyers or accountants helping people prepare wills where they treat it as if it's an off-reserve piece of land. They generalize that the problems for an Indigenous person or for a status Indian, because that's the technical term in this situation, are the same as the problems for me as a non-Indigenous person living wherever. That's the first mistake. But even as you move from Songhees, which has one land code, to Sartlip, which has another land code, to Tsawwassen, which is now in a modern day treaty, the rules are different. And if you don't take the time to understand those rules, acquaint yourself with those rules, and you can't assume that your client will know those rules, you are going to walk them into a load of trouble, which people like Cam, Mike, and I will then be trying to sort out after the fact. And on Cam's point about the fact that there's a continuing relationship, these regimes are always changing. Like we're used to in the non-Indigenous world is that like once every 20 years, there's a change to the Intestate Succession Act or to the Wills and Estates Act or whichever legislation is in place in whichever province is on reserves. Sometimes the rules change, will over a period of 10 years change 2 or 3 times. Or the family circumstances of your client, who their children, which band their children belong to, will change. And if you don't maintain the ongoing relationship to be aware of what's happening on the reserve and to be aware of what's happening in your client's family and let them know that it's important to keep you up to date, it's going to end up on the desk of some litigator like me. And instead of your client or your client's children enjoying the fruits of their wealth, that'll be lawyers and accountants enjoying it.
Thank you, Robert. That's so maybe just a lead on to that. Maybe Cam, Robert, anybody can answer on this one. Like, obviously it's so specific. How much need is there and willingness is there for financial planners to go and do this work, to get involved? Because like, if we're going to take on a client and you're a CFP or have some fiduciary responsibility, you have to do what's best interest for the clients, do that work before you can make any recommendations. Is there a desire from the communities to connect with us if we're willing to put in that work? Like, what would anybody can answer that one? Or is there so much mistrust and hesitancy that there's a roadblock there? Like,
well, I think actually the problem in many cases, and this is where the suggestion that Cam made about reaching out to the local, like if you're working with a band, and again, I'm going to use that as a technical term, it can really pay off, is that often the problem is not mistrust. It's in many cases, in my experience, a failure to appreciate that there is something that can be done or something that needs to be done. And again, I'm speaking of the on reserve situation, but actually I've seen people off reserve where there's opportunities that have been missed. But where there's this sort of long-term culture, which has been inculcated by the Indian Act, by many extents, by Indian affairs, of doing things very informally, of not having rigorous systems in place. And so people don't realize, like I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to people who are effectively millionaires who don't have a will, people who have significant on reserve income, but haven't set up their business to make sure that their income is on reserve and actually collected tax-free. Because no one has emphasized to them in the way that, like in law, when we set up our law firm, we went to a lawyer because it's that thing where you get advice. And that culture of getting advice has not been inculcated in many cases. And like, for example, even holding a seminar through the band where there's just like the pharmacy reps pay for breakfast for the doctors, pay for dinner for, the CP holders or the young people, and do a financial literacy course this session.
So that is welcome. That's, yeah. Okay. So that is an approach to take and
they're polite about it and don't say only hire me at the end of it.
Sure.
Yeah,
Cam,
no,
and sorry, just cognitive of time on yourself, Robert, because I know you have to sneak away probably a little bit earlier. I just want to make sure that we can send your contact to everybody. We're going to do a follow-up message to all attendees. Just again, first conversation, we're trying to bridge some contacts, some introductions, and if you guys are okay with it, are you okay if we share contact afterwards? Okay, yeah. Thanks, Robert. So sorry, go ahead, Cam. Sorry to jump in.
No worries, Phil. And yeah, I mean, we only have a couple more minutes here, but I'll just take a quick snippet there. I think the other side of that is also for the financial planners to build their relationship with lawyers and build their relationship with accountants as well. For example, myself, I'm an accountant by trade, therefore I can review financial statements, provide advice, and go down that path. But I would reach out to Robert if there is a legal thing. I can't draft any legal documents. And the same thing, I would be reaching out to Mike and yourself and anyone else, because I can't provide investment advice of where they should invest and not. So again, relationship. So.
Mm-hmm. And maybe keep going on that, Cam. Is there, do you see, like Mike, financial planners in the space that you're working with, in those meetings, conversations over the experience that you had? Are there some around the table? Is it very few?
Yeah,
Is it
so
starting to be more? What's
yeah, for sure. So mostly around the table is sort of the big banks and bigger sort of financial sort of people who deal with trusts, because a lot of the nations will have trust money that comes in and which has to be managed from that perspective. But now what I'm seeing more in my own practice is I'm seeing individuals, individual Indigenous people starting to file tax returns, starting to go down that path and starting to have those dollars where they are looking at sort of investing those dollars. I mean, just yesterday, I actually had a client reach out and say, got a bit of money. What do I sort of do with it? And I was like, this is great. This is the conversation, right? So yeah, no, it's definitely an opportunity there for sure.
good? Great. Mike, maybe I'll leave you on some last comments here for the panel discussion. Again, we're going to share your contact out to everyone. If we do have a few more minutes here on the panel, so if people have more questions, please send them in before we have to jump off here. But yeah, Mike, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, certainly. So many things to think about. I really appreciate Robert and Cam. Thanks for sharing those experiences, and I hope that we get to stay in touch as well, because I have lots of folks that may want to chat with you. Maybe just to kind of wrap this from my side, there was a question about what not to do. And I just wanted to reframe it as something like things to do in building that relationship. And here are just some random thoughts. So again, the Indigenous diaspora is so diverse, right? But if you want just like a starting point and then adapt from there, overall, I would do some work on decolonizing and what does decolonizing actually look like. And I'll give kind of 5 thoughts. So if you're going to approach someone, first of all, slow down. Colonial processes said that there was timelines. Before that, there really wasn't. You know, there was the day and there were the seasons, and those were what allowed us to move. And so slowing down and responding to the natural times and rhythms that humans have is a good place to start. Another piece is ask. I think Robert and Cam had both talked about asking and getting information, what people want to be called, how they want to be addressed, where you can help. Also, part of that is not assuming, right? Assuming is colonizing. Don't act. Instead, just take time to listen. Listening is a decolonizing act. And acting and doing something and thinking that you know what's right, so you're going to act, is a colonizing act. I would say 2 more things. First, honoring the unknown. Honor the fact that you don't know everything and that they don't know everything and that there's a bunch of stuff that you don't know. A lot of the worldview comes from a place which is honoring the unknown, our relationships, all the things that we do not know. And if you go in there and you're acting like you know it all, you're going to break relationship like right away. That's a colonial framework, is that you have to have all the information. Not true. Lots of worldviews don't believe that. And so that's decolonizing. And the final one is honoring spirit. Whatever it is, your practice doesn't have to be religious, but there is something inside of you that is deeply human, and it's honoring that human part of you. And in the clients, I'm sure many of you, if you're financial planners, do that with your clients. You see through what they're saying to some sort of deeper motivations that they're having or where they're at, and you try to meet them there. That is an act of decolonizing your interactions. So that's
awesome.
What I might share.
That is brilliant. We're gonna spend some more time with you, Mike. And the last comment here for both Robert and Cam, I'll spin this off when we have our discussion around your article here shortly, Mike. But what is the biggest reward, impact that you've had from working with Indigenous communities? Robert, maybe we'll start with you on that one.
Look, I started working at McCarthy Tatro, helping big organizations fight over big piles of money. It did nothing to make me feel motivated in the morning. I've got to say, I get every day to wake up and work on something where I actually feel like I'm doing some good for people who really need some help, and I can help try to fix some really long-standing problems and can help be part of the solution, part, not all, part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And that's been a great experience.
Thanks, Robert. That's great. Cam, over to you. Your biggest takeaway, if you have one or a couple.
Yeah, I can't just pinpoint one. I mean, I'm not as a veteran as Robert is there. I've only had the opportunity to work with Indigenous peoples for the last probably 8 or 10 years here from my end, but I have a lot of memorable experiences. I think my top notch is just all the friendships and the relationships that I've built throughout the year. They started as me sitting across the table from a chief and council to attending feasts and events with them. And then now being invited over to their house to break bread with them as well. So, that is probably some of the key items that I've built. I mean, other than that, I've been out to archaeology sites, to villages as well, where that's happening. Just being invited and being more than just an advisor from that perspective, and relationships and friendships as well. So yeah, thanks, Phil.
Awesome. That's great. I think that's why we do this. That's why we're financial planners. We want to have those deeper values and results with people. So thank you guys so much for sharing. We will keep in touch. Like I said, we didn't know where this conversation was going to go, where today was going to go, but it's great to have wonderful contacts already doing this work before the announcements of last year, of this year, what's going on. So thank you. Hopefully we're inspired and moving forward to make some changes as we go in our own practices. So thank you guys all for being here.